Redditor 1. I've never told anyone this before, but I still remember my grandfather's story as if it were etched into my very soul. He was a worldly man, one who had spent most of his life captaining boats through the Panama Canal and sailing across the vast, unpredictable waters of the Americas and Asia. After decades at sea, he finally retired and settled down in rural Louisiana, not far from the Air Force Base in Alexandria. I remember the way his eyes would light up when he recounted his adventures, but there was one night, one inexplicable night, that he never fully explained, a night that still sends shivers down my spine. It was an early summer evening, the kind when the humid Louisiana air hangs heavy with the scent of moss and wet earth. My grandfather was sitting on his creaking porch, a place where he found solace after long days spent fishing and mending old nets. The porch overlooked an immense field that stretched out like a dark, endless ocean under the deepening twilight. I could picture him there, an old salt with weathered skin, a calm figure in a worn rocking chair, his gaze fixed on the horizon. That night, as the sun dipped below the distant trees and the first stars began to emerge, something unusual caught his attention. He described it to me many times over the years, each retelling punctuated by a pause as if he were reluctant to relive it fully. He said he noticed a strange light in the distance. At first he assumed it was just another aircraft from the nearby base, a helicopter perhaps, because he was no stranger to the constant parade of military planes overhead. But this light was different. It moved in a manner that was both deliberate and almost ethereal, gliding across the sky with the smoothness of a helicopter, yet producing not a single sound. My grandfather would lean forward, his eyes narrowing as he watched the light shift and dance across the field. It was as if the light had a mind of its own, drifting past his house, skimming the horizon, and then circling back in a silent, otherworldly ballet. For nearly 20 minutes, he said, he sat there, transfixed by this inexplicable phenomenon. I can almost feel the weight of those minutes, each second stretching out into a quiet eternity filled with awe and unease. The light moved with a ghostly precision, defying all expectations of mechanical noise or erratic behavior. It was pure, almost surgical in its movement, and yet entirely silent. My grandfather was a practical man, used to the hum of engines and the distant drone of military craft, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this. Then, as if obeying some hidden command, the light altered its course. It slowly descended and, with an almost imperceptible grace, landed in the middle of the field. For what felt like 10 long minutes, it sat there, a solitary orb of radiance amidst the darkness. No sound broke the heavy silence of that night. No buzz or thrum of machinery punctuated its presence. It was simply there, a mysterious sentinel in the stillness of rural Louisiana. I remember my grandfather's voice faltering as he described that moment. He said he got up from his rocking chair and, with cautious steps, made his way toward the field. I could see the mixture of curiosity and dread in his eyes as he approached the spot where the light had rested. When he reached the center of the field, he looked for any sign of disturbance. Scorch marks on the earth, an indentation in the soil, anything to indicate that something had landed. But there was nothing. The ground was undisturbed, as if the light had never been there at all. He hesitated to call it a UFO, he told me, partly because he lived so close to an Air Force base and was accustomed to the predictable patterns of military aircraft. Yet the silence of that light, the complete absence of sound, was something he could never reconcile. In all his years at sea, amidst raging storms and the cacophony of engines, he had never experienced anything as eerily silent as that night. I used to sit wide-eyed at his feet as he recounted the incident, the memory of that silent apparition lingering in the charged pauses between his words. Even though I was just a boy then, I understood that what he described was not of this world. The way he spoke of that light, with both wonder and a profound sadness, imbued it with a haunting quality. It was as if the light had come to remind him of all the mysteries he had seen in his travels, mysteries that defied explanation and still haunted him in his twilight years. As I grew older, I began to realize that his story was more than just a strange encounter. It was a glimpse into the hidden depths of our world. It taught me that even in the most familiar places, the quiet fields of Louisiana, the soft hum of everyday life, there lurked secrets waiting to be uncovered. My grandfather's experience became a part of my own understanding of the universe, a silent reminder that the boundary between the known and the unknown is often thinner than we imagine. I still remember the long, humid nights of Louisiana, when the air hangs thick with the promise of rain and the sky is a canvas of swirling dark clouds and emerging stars. On such nights, I find myself drawn to the quiet solitude of my own porch, gazing out at the fields beyond, wondering if somewhere out there that same silent light might reappear. The memory of my grandfather's encounter lingers like a ghost, a spectral reminder that our world is far more mysterious than the humdrum of daily life would suggest. In the quiet moments, when the world is hushed and the only sound is the distant call of a night bird or the rustling of leaves in the warm breeze, I often think of that light. I wonder what it was. A fragment of a secret technology, a visitor from another realm, or perhaps something that defies any label we could assign. The silence of that light, its inexplicable arrival and departure, remains an enigma that no rational explanation has ever managed to dispel. Even now, I carry my grandfather's story with me like a cherished, albeit unsettling heirloom. It has shaped the way I view the night sky and the world around me, reminding me that there are forces and events beyond our understanding. The quiet of that Louisiana night, the surreal dance of the mysterious light, and the profound silence that followed have all merged into a memory that is as vivid as it is inexplicable. Sometimes, on rainy nights when the sound of the wind outside my window is the only thing I can hear, I swear I see a faint glimmer, a soft, luminous presence moving silently across the dark landscape. And in those moments, I feel an overwhelming connection to my grandfather, to the mysteries he encountered, and to the vast, unknowable universe that continues to reveal its secrets, one silent light at a time. Redditor 2. I've never told anyone this before, but I've always believed there was something otherworldly lurking just beyond our everyday view. Growing up in the suburbs, I was surrounded by neatly trimmed lawns and quiet streets. But every night, without fail, I'd catch a glimpse of a strange, unnervingly bright star. It was always in the same corner of the sky, or sometimes in another, its light unmistakable, piercing through the dark like a beacon. My dad, forever suspicious of things he couldn't explain, once said that star was the work of something beyond our world. He even bought a telescope, claiming it was for me so I could learn astronomy. I knew better. That telescope was his excuse to spend every clear night scanning the heavens, his eyes fixed on that brilliant, unyielding point of light. It was a humid summer evening, the kind when the air hangs heavy and every sound seems amplified. I remember the gentle hum of the ceiling fan in my room as I lay awake, the city's distant traffic a lullaby. I had just finished a late dinner, and the remnants of the night's heat still clung to the windows. The streetlights outside cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement, and I felt that familiar stir of anticipation, a sense that the night held secrets waiting to be uncovered. I stepped outside onto the back porch, a creaking wooden platform that overlooked our quiet suburban street. The sky was clear, a deep indigo sprinkled with countless stars. But there it was, the strange star, impossibly bright, fixed in one corner as if it were deliberately watching. I remember standing there, my heart thumping softly, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. It wasn't like the other stars. Its light pulsed with an intensity that was almost hypnotic. My mind filled with wild, half-formed thoughts about aliens and hidden messages from beyond. That night, I noticed something different. As the minutes passed, the star's brightness seemed to fluctuate. Sometimes it was there, dominating that small patch of sky, and then, inexplicably, it vanished, only to reappear moments later. I remember feeling a mixture of awe and unease, as if the universe were winking at me, teasing me with its mysteries. I couldn't help but wonder what secret lay behind its constant, unnerving glow. My dad was out in the backyard too, fiddling with his telescope under the soft glow of a solitary lamp. He always maintained a stern look when he talked about the sky, his eyes narrowing as if trying to pierce through its vastness. "It's just a shooting star," he'd say, dismissively, though I knew deep down he wasn't convinced either. I had seen him, night after night, leaning against the telescope, his gaze locked onto that spot in the sky. It was as if he were expecting something he couldn't quite put into words. One night, as I was returning from my room to the living area, I heard a blood-curdling scream that shattered the calm. My heart raced as I bolted outside, my bare feet slapping against the cool, dewy grass. There, on a battered metal bench near the edge of our yard, was my mother. She was shaking uncontrollably, her eyes wide and unseeing, as if haunted by the very vision of a nightmare. "Mom, what's wrong?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling as much as hers. Between sobs, she pointed a trembling finger toward the house. "The telescope. Dad saw something he couldn't explain," she whispered, her words barely audible over the rhythmic beating of my heart. I rushed inside with her, where my father was still out on the porch, his face a mask of disbelief as he peered through the telescope. Together we huddled in the dim light of our living room, the cool interior contrasting sharply with the feverish energy that gripped us. My mother's voice wavered as she tried to calm herself. "It's probably just a shooting star. Nothing more," she insisted, though the tremor in her words betrayed her fear. But what had my father seen? We never spoke of it much after that night. The next morning, as the sun rose over our suburban street, my father quietly tucked the telescope away in the closet, as if burying the memory of that unsettling encounter. My mother, too, avoided the topic, changing the subject whenever it was mentioned. The mystery of that strange, ever-changing star, sometimes present, sometimes absent, and on that fateful night, accompanied by something far more terrifying, hung silently in the air, an unspoken truth between us. Over time, the memory of that night became a ghostly presence in our lives. I would sometimes catch my mother glancing out the window, her eyes searching the dark sky as if seeking reassurance or a sign that all was well. My father, too, would occasionally pause before heading out in the evening, as if listening for something he couldn't quite name. And I, the once hopeful stargazer, found that the wonder of the cosmos had turned into something darker, a reminder that the universe was full of mysteries we were never meant to solve. In the years that followed, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a fluke, a trick of the light, perhaps, or an overactive imagination spurred by late-night movies and whispered legends. But every time I looked up at the same patch of sky, that strange star returned in my memory, its brightness a constant, unyielding marker of the unknown. I began to document my observations in a battered notebook, scribbling down the times it appeared, the way its light pulsed, and the vague sensations that accompanied its presence. I even attempted to take pictures with my old digital camera, but the images were always overexposed. A blur of light that confirmed nothing, yet hinted at everything. There were nights when I'd lie awake, my mind churning with a mix of excitement and dread, wondering if the phenomenon would reappear, if it was somehow a harbinger of something else entirely. I would replay that terrifying moment when my mother screamed, the shock of it searing into my consciousness. I remembered the cold shock of the night air on my skin, the sound of my own panicked breathing, and the unexplainable feeling that, for just a brief moment, the veil between our world and something beyond had been lifted. Sometimes I even dreamed of that star. In my dreams, it was not just a distant light, but a living, pulsing entity that beckoned me to follow it into the depths of space. I would find myself floating through an endless void, stars swirling around me in a silent, mesmerizing dance, while that familiar, unnerving glow guided me onward. I awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my ears, and for a moment I was convinced that the boundary between dream and reality had blurred. To this day, I still don't know what that strange star was or why it appeared so consistently in that particular corner of the sky. My father never gave me a clear answer, and my mother only offered vague reassurances that it was nothing to worry about. We don't speak of it much, if at all, because perhaps some mysteries are best left unsolved. The unanswered questions linger, a silent testament to the vast, unfathomable unknown that lies just beyond our reach. Now, as an adult, I often find myself standing on my back porch on clear nights, gazing upward into the darkness, my mind filled with a quiet, persistent dread. The suburban calm of our neighborhood, with its neatly trimmed lawns and softly humming streetlights, feels almost deceiving, a fragile veneer covering a universe teeming with secrets. And every so often, I catch a glimpse of a bright light in that same familiar corner. a reminder that somewhere out there in the endless expanse of the night sky, the unknown still watches, waiting. I still wonder what it all means. Was it merely a shooting star, or was it something more? Something that hinted at the existence of beings beyond our comprehension. The memory of that night, of my mother's terrified scream and my father's silent, pensive gaze, remains with me like a faded scar. It's a reminder that, despite our best efforts to understand the world, there are forces out there that defy explanation, lurking in the darkness, quietly waiting for the moment when we dare to look up. And so I continue to watch, always on the alert, forever changed by the unexplainable light that once shone so brilliantly in our suburban sky. Redditor 3. I've never told anyone this before, but I still remember that night as if it were carved into my memory. I was 22, fresh out of college and full of restless energy, driving through the rolling hills of upstate New York with a group of 7 close friends. We'd piled into an old sedan, its faded seats and creaky frame a perfect backdrop for one of our legendary late-night road trips. We were leaving Canandaigua and heading towards the suburbs, the sky above a vast, dark canvas punctuated by the soft glow of the setting sun. It was around 8:45 p.m., the kind of warm, lingering summer evening when the air is thick with humidity and the smell of cut grass mingles with the distant scent of a nearby lake. The car hummed along a winding road, the rhythmic clatter of tires on the asphalt almost soothing. I remember glancing over at the dashboard clock and feeling a familiar anticipation for what the night might bring, as if the darkness held secrets we were meant to discover. As we climbed higher up the hill, those of us sitting in the front seat began to notice something odd in the sky. At first, it was just a tiny, blinking white light, almost like one of those distant stars that seems too bright to be natural. I say noticed subconsciously because none of us really focused on it immediately. We were chatting, laughing, and sharing the casual conspiracies that always circulate among friends on such journeys. But then, as we drove further, the light began to shift its position. It started high above us and then moved, almost imperceptibly at first, from our left to our right. I remember my heart giving a small, startled thump when the light descended to about eye level, right over the city lights far below. In the span of what felt like a split second, maybe a fifth of a second, it blinked on and off, its motion too deliberate to be random. The change was subtle but undeniable. It was as if the light had chosen that exact moment to reveal itself. The sight made me freeze for a moment, my mind racing with possibilities that I dared not speak out loud. The car's driver, noticing our sudden silence, pulled the vehicle over to the curb near a wide stretch of open land. "Guys, wait up," he said, his tone laced with confusion and curiosity. We all piled out of the car, our footsteps echoing on the pavement as we gathered in a loose semicircle, our eyes glued to the heavens. Those of us in the back hadn't seen the light at all. They looked at us with bewildered expressions as if we were suddenly possessed by some shared vision. Once we were all outside, the full spectacle unfolded before us. The light, which had been a mere dot in the sky, expanded into a shape that defied explanation. From our roughly horizontal view, it appeared to be a triangular formation, with sides spanning roughly 25 degrees, capped by what looked like a square top. It hovered, utterly silent, above the skyline, as if suspended by some force that defied gravity. For 2 or 3 long minutes we stood there in collective awe, the only sounds the quiet rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, and our own subdued whispers of disbelief. I remember my palms sweating and my throat tightening, each blink of that bizarre formation etching a deeper sense of foreboding into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us. Its blinking light almost seemed to pulse with an intelligence of its own. In that moment, one of my friends, a die-hard conspiracy theorist with a penchant for the paranormal, insisted on trying to communicate with it. He stepped forward, arms raised as if in a greeting, and muttered something unintelligible about establishing contact. I could see the strain in his eyes as he waited for a response, his face contorting in a mix of hope and fear. Within minutes, he was doubled over in pain, clutching his head as a piercing migraine set in, a headache so intense it felt like it might shatter his skull. I still shudder at the memory of that, a grim reminder that not every encounter with the unknown is benign. After what felt like an eternity wrapped in silence and uneasy wonder, we reluctantly decided to leave. The triangular object had done nothing more than hover silently, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, shooting off at a speed that left nothing but a fleeting trail of white light against the dark canvas of the sky. We all stood there for a moment, staring after it as if expecting it to return, our minds too full of questions to process the reality of what we'd just witnessed. We climbed back into the car and drove off, our conversation a mix of excited theories and skeptical dismissal. We recounted every detail over and over again on the way to our next destination, a friend's house where we gathered with more people to share our unbelievable experience. But despite our fervent discussions, no concrete evidence remained. There were no photos to show, no recordings to analyze. It had all happened too quickly, a surreal event that slipped through the cracks of our rational minds. In the years since that night, I've seen a few other strange lights, but none quite like that triangular, blinking enigma. Most are high in the sky, indistinct and fleeting, their patterns lost to the expanse of the cosmos. But that night in upstate New York, with the sun setting and the world holding its breath, something extraordinary occurred. A moment when the universe revealed a secret that was both terrifying and wondrous. Even now, when I find myself alone on a quiet evening, I can't help but look up at the sky, half expecting to see that same brilliant light. I remember the feeling, the tightness in my chest, the racing of my heart, and the overwhelming sense that something beyond our understanding was out there, silently watching. I wonder if it was a visit from beings from another world, or perhaps a natural phenomenon that defies the logic of our everyday existence. I still believe, with every fiber of my being, that something is out there, and that sometimes, in the blink of an eye, it reaches down to remind us that we are never truly alone. That night has haunted me ever since, a vivid chapter in a life filled with mundane routines and simple suburban comforts. It has made me question what I know about the world and what lies hidden in the vast, uncharted darkness above us. And though I've tried to explain it away as a trick of the light or an optical illusion born of our collective overactive imaginations, the memory remains indelible, a constant reminder that, in that fleeting, suspended moment, the cosmos itself was speaking to us in a language of light and silence. Redditor Ford. I've never told anyone this before, but one summer night changed everything for me. I was about 22, living in a small apartment on the edge of town, and, like most nights back then, I fell asleep on the worn-out couch in the living room. That couch, with its familiar sag and threadbare fabric, was my bed because I always got home too late. Directly behind my head there was a large window that framed the inky darkness outside. I had a best friend in the form of a Great Dane Knack Lab mix named Cameron. She was still a puppy then, too small to roam freely with the other big dogs in the neighborhood, so every night she curled up with me as I drifted off. Cameron was a remarkably calm dog, one of those pets that never barked in the house no matter what I did. Even when I deliberately tried to make her bark, she'd just give me a disapproving look and nuzzle for affection. There were only 2 times in that summer when she ever barked inside, and both incidents remain etched in my memory as inexplicable horrors that I can hardly bear to recount. The first time it happened, I had been sleeping on that couch, with Cameron's soft body draped over my chest. I remember the warmth of her fur, the steady rhythm of her breathing, a comforting sound in the dead of night. Then, without warning, I was jolted awake by the sound of heavy paws thudding on the floor and a sudden, frantic bark echoing through the house. I sat up with a start, my heart pounding as I realized that Cameron had leaped off the couch and dashed into the kitchen. The barking was so loud and desperate that it sounded as if someone, or something, was intruding into our home. I froze, paralyzed with fear, knowing that I had locked the door behind me and that my family was supposed to be asleep. Within seconds, my mom and dad burst out of their bedrooms, their voices overlapping in urgent shouts. "What the heck is going on?" Their footsteps thudded down the hall as they rushed into the living room. I couldn't get a word out before Cameron suddenly stopped barking, her head tilted in a confused, almost pleading manner, and trotted off into the darkness of the kitchen. When my parents and I inspected the area, nothing was out of place. The door was still securely locked, the kitchen undisturbed, with no sign of an intruder or any disturbance at all. The only abnormality had been that night's sudden, inexplicable barking. A week later, the terror returned in a way I'll never forget. That night, I decided I needed absolute darkness to sleep better, so I turned off all the lights. I settled back onto the couch, Cameron once again curled up next to me. I had grown accustomed to the steady, reassuring silence of the suburban night, punctuated only by the occasional hum of a passing car. But deep in that pitch-black room, I was startled awake by a different sound. A low, persistent growl emanating from somewhere outside the window, behind my head. I bolted upright, my pulse racing, and heard Cameron begin to bark furiously. Her barks were laced with a strange urgency, as though she were confronting an unseen menace. I sat there, heart pounding, and turned slowly to look out through the closed blinds. In the dim outline of the room, a bright blue light filtered in through the window, a light so intense and pure it seemed out of place in the familiar gloom of my living room. At first, it appeared as a small dot, but in seconds, the light grew larger, its brilliance intensifying as it moved steadily closer to the window. I could feel a chill crawling up my spine as I watched it, unable to tear my eyes away. The light was coming from outside, directly through the glass behind my head, and it bathed the room in an eerie, unnatural glow. My throat tightened, and I could taste copper on my tongue as fear gripped me. I tried to scream, but all that came out was a strangled, breathless noise. Like forced air escaping from deep within me, I was frozen in place, rooted to the couch, as the light continued its inexorable advance. Cameron, normally the picture of calm, was going crazy. She barked and growled, her small frame trembling with panic. I could see her silhouette against the backdrop of the blue light, her eyes wide and alert, as if she sensed that something was profoundly wrong. My mind raced with a million questions. What was that light? Why was it coming here? And most terrifying of all, was it dangerous? Every rational thought was drowned out by the raw, primal terror surging through me. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light reached the window. I remember the exact moment when it seemed to hover directly in front of the glass, its surface pulsating in a hypnotic rhythm. My heart hammered so fiercely I feared it would burst, and the silence of that moment was shattered only by the frantic barking of Cameron. In that frozen, suffocating instant, I felt completely isolated, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape. Before I could process any more, the blue light abruptly vanished. I blinked, trying to clear my foggy mind, and suddenly I was awake, sitting on the couch in the early morning light. I looked around, disoriented, wondering if it had all been a nightmare. But the evidence was undeniable. I had been paralyzed with fear, my body frozen as if held in place by some unseen force, and the relentless barking of Cameron had filled the silence. I forced myself to stand up and check the digital alarm clock on the side table. It read 4:02 a.m., exactly when the light had appeared. Later that morning, as I sat alone on the couch with a half-empty cup of coffee in my hand, my mom wandered into the living room on her way to the kitchen. She paused by the couch and asked in a hushed, worried tone, "Why was Cameron barking so much last night? It sounded like there was someone in the house." I froze, my heart sinking, and managed only a choked, You heard her too?" She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable, and that was the end of the conversation. No one dared speak of it again, and we all simply carried on as if nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew that night had altered something fundamental in our little family. I've tried to rationalize it all since then, telling myself it was just a dream or an overactive imagination fueled by too many late nights. Yet every time I catch a glimpse of a strange light outside my window or hear a distant, unexplained noise, I'm reminded of that horrifying summer night. Even now, I hesitate to bring it up. People look at me like I'm some kind of psycho when I mention it, and the thought still terrifies me to my core. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the shadows seem to move on their own, I can't help but wonder, what if that was just the beginning? What if that blue light was a harbinger of something far more sinister, a silent message from beyond? I try not to dwell on it, but the memory lingers like a ghost at the edge of my mind, a reminder that in the darkness, we are never truly alone. I still find traces of its presence, an unexplainable chill in the air, faint scratches on the window frame that no one can account for, and even the occasional, inexplicable noise when the house is at its quietest. I know I shouldn't let it consume me, but some nights I lie awake and listen for that sound, for that silent, foreboding signal that something is watching, waiting just beyond the veil of the ordinary. And though I have no proof to show anyone, the terror of that night remains with me, a constant, unyielding reminder that sometimes the most inexplicable horrors are the ones that come in the dead of night, when the world is asleep and only the whispers of our darkest fears remain. Redditor 5. I've never told anyone this before, but I still remember that night as if it happened only yesterday. I was about 8 years old, sharing a small, cramped bedroom with my older brother. It was a stuffy, warm night, and our parents had tucked us in tightly, promising that tomorrow would bring a cooler day. I don't remember what time I went to sleep that night, but I do remember waking up in the middle of it, with the heavy silence of the dark room pressing in on me. In that quiet, still moment, I became aware of a strange restlessness. My eyes flickered open, and in the half-light from the street lamp outside, I could see the outlines of furniture and the faded posters on the walls. But something was different that night. A subtle, inexplicable feeling that I couldn't quite place. I lay there, heart pounding in my chest, as a sudden urge compelled me to sit up. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and crept toward the window, trying desperately not to wake my brother. Through the cracked window, I saw a sight that would haunt me for years to come. 3 distinct lights, one red, one green, and one blue, hovered in the dark sky, almost as if they were fixed to the stars. At first, I thought they might be airplanes or satellites, but there was something unnaturally deliberate in the way they shone, brighter than any ordinary light in the night sky. I remember my little heart racing, and my breath coming in shallow gasps as I rubbed my eyes, certain that I must be dreaming. Yet the lights did not fade. They remained, constant and steady. I slowly moved closer to the window, peering out into the inky darkness. The red light burned with an intensity that made me flinch. The green shimmered softly like a ghostly halo, and the blue glowed with an almost hypnotic coolness. For several minutes, I watched in terrified fascination as these lights held their positions in the sky, their arrangement almost like the points of a triangle I couldn't quite comprehend. Then, in a moment that still sends shivers down my spine, I moved my head slightly from side to side. To my absolute horror, the lights moved with me. As I tilted my head left, the red light slid in that direction. When I turned right, the blue light followed. It was as if they were not fixed in the sky at all, but were somehow tethered to me, or at least to my gaze. I remembered the sensation vividly, a prickling on the back of my neck, a chill that raced up my spine, and the overwhelming realization that these lights were tracking my every movement. I was scared shitless. My mind raced with desperate questions. Were they following me? Was I trapped in some kind of nightmare? I tried to blink away the terror, willing myself to believe it was all just a trick of the light or an overactive imagination spurred by childhood fears. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the lights remained, each color shifting in perfect unison with my movements as though they were sentient. I could still hear my heart pounding, an erratic rhythm echoing in the silence of the room. The air felt suddenly cold, even though the summer night had been warm moments before. I pulled the thin blanket tighter around my shoulders and pressed my face against the cold glass of the window, as if that might somehow break the strange connection. Every time I moved, the lights mimicked my movements, following the sway of my head as if they were shadows of my own soul. Fear turned into a desperate need to understand what was happening. I squinted at the lights, trying to discern any detail, any sign of a shape or a pattern, but they remained as inscrutable as distant stars. In that moment, the world outside seemed to narrow to just those 3 brilliant points of color, their hypnotic dance filling every corner of my vision. I felt utterly isolated, a small child left alone in a vast, indifferent universe, with these mysterious lights as my only companions. Time seemed to stretch out in that frozen, terrifying moment. I must have watched them for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only minutes before I finally managed to tear my eyes away. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the rapid beating of my heart and the sound of my own shallow breathing. Eventually, I forced myself to turn away from the window and crawl back into bed, every fiber of my body trembling with a lingering dread. I fell into a fitful sleep, though I was too terrified to ever fully close my eyes again. In the murky haze of that night, my mind replayed the image of those moving lights over and over, a looping nightmare that refused to fade even as sleep took me. I don't remember exactly how long I stayed awake, but I do know that by morning the memory of those lights had burned itself into my consciousness. In the following days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, that the universe had revealed a secret too vast for my young mind to comprehend. I would lie in bed at night, staring up at the same window, half expecting to see those 3 lights reappear. I tried to tell my older brother about it, but his dismissive scoff and the casual tone in which he described shooting stars left me feeling isolated and misunderstood. He said it was probably just a trick of my imagination, a fleeting moment caused by the peculiar way the streetlights reflected off passing clouds. But deep down, I knew what I had seen was no ordinary phenomenon. I clung to that memory for years, the image of the red, green, and blue lights etching itself into my mind like a scar. It was a reminder that sometimes, in the quiet moments of our lives, the universe reveals its hidden truths in ways that defy explanation. And even now, whenever I find myself alone in a dark room, I can't help but glance toward any window, hoping against hope that those same lights might return, following my every move once more. In retrospect, I've come to see that experience as a turning point, a moment when the veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary was momentarily lifted, leaving me with more questions than answers. I've spent years trying to piece together what it might have meant, poring over old books and searching online for any record of a similar phenomenon. But every explanation I've encountered seems too mundane to capture the raw terror and wonder I felt that night. It's as if I caught a glimpse of something that exists on the fringes of our reality, a secret that the world is not yet ready to share. Sometimes, late at night, when the moon is high and the world is quiet, I swear I can still feel that eerie presence. The memory of that night lingers, a silent, persistent echo that reminds me of the fragility of our understanding. And though I've grown older and tried to rationalize the experience with science and logic, there remains a part of me that will always wonder if those lights were truly a product of this world, or if they were a message from something far beyond our grasp. Now, whenever I find myself in a dark room or looking out into a star-studded sky, I can't help but remember that night. The night when a child's innocent sleep was shattered by 3 unearthly lights that moved in perfect harmony with his fear. And in that memory, I carry both a sense of wonder and a lingering terror, a quiet acknowledgement that the universe holds mysteries far beyond what we can ever hope to understand. Redditor 6. My boss, Dr. Carver, a man with a PhD in psychology, has a story that haunts me. Every day, he wears a look of quiet resignation mixed with a hint of dread, as if he carries the weight of unspeakable secrets. He claims to have been abducted multiple times, to have communicated with UFOs, and even to have had aliens steal personal items from his house. He insists that he's experienced countless out-of-body episodes, moments when his consciousness left his body and drifted in realms beyond our understanding. I've spent many sleepless nights wondering whether he's telling the absolute truth, if his experiences are vivid dream states he mistakes for reality, or if he's simply delusional. I find it hard to believe any of it, yet every so often something happens that makes me question the boundaries of our world. It was one late autumn evening, around 10:30 p.m., when I was finishing up some reports at the office. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the soft clatter of keyboards provided a strange comfort as I worked. The building was nearly empty, the only other soul being Dr. Carver, who sat in his cluttered office across the hall. I remember noticing him staring out of his window, his eyes distant as if searching for something hidden in the darkness. At that moment, I couldn't help but wonder what haunted him. Later that night, as I locked up and made my way to my car, I recalled snippets of his rambling conversation from earlier in the day. He had spoken in a low, steady voice about being taken aboard a silent, luminous craft. He described the sensation as if his mind had been lifted out of his body, a floating, disembodied awareness filled with cold dread and exhilarating wonder. I brushed off his words as the eccentric musings of a man well-versed in the human psyche. But as I drove along the deserted highway, his words began to echo in my mind. I still remember that drive clearly. The night was crisp, the sky a deep indigo flecked with stars. I was on a lonely stretch of road, miles away from any sign of civilization. The only sound was the steady rumble of my car and the whisper of wind against the window. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a bright, pulsating light in the distance. For a split second, I assumed it was nothing more than a reflection or a misinterpreted headlight, but then it moved in a way that defied natural explanation. A slow, deliberate drift across the horizon. My heart began to pound, and I felt a chill run down my spine. In that moment, I remembered Dr. Carver's stories. I pulled over on the shoulder, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I tried to steady my breathing. Outside, the world was silent, the only movement the shifting shadows of trees in the moonlight. I stared at the horizon for several minutes, wondering if I was hallucinating. The light, however, remained. It was as if the universe had turned its attention toward me, offering a fleeting glimpse into something far beyond the mundane. I quickly restarted the car, my mind a jumbled mix of fear and fascination, and drove home in a daze. At work the next day, I tried to dismiss the incident as a trick of the light, but over the following weeks, subtle signs began to creep into my life. Late at night, when I was alone in my apartment, I sometimes caught a glimpse of a strange glimmer through my window, a shape in the periphery of my vision, a flash of movement too deliberate to be a passing car. These were small, fleeting moments that left me unsettled. I started researching topics like DMT and the spirit molecule, trying to find a rational explanation for the altered states of consciousness Dr. Carver described. Every theory I read about hinted at the possibility that our perceptions could be manipulated by forces we barely understand. One particular evening, I sat in my dimly lit living room, the clock reading 11:47 p.m., when I heard a soft, almost imperceptible tapping at my window. I paused, my throat tightening, and slowly crept toward the dark glass. Outside, under the weak glow of a street lamp, I thought I saw a shadow flit across the lawn. For an instant, I felt as if I were being watched by something unseen. I forced myself to blink and look away, rationalizing that it was nothing more than a stray cat or a trick of the light, but the feeling persisted, a gnawing sense of vulnerability that left me questioning every sound in the dark. I tried to push the thoughts aside and focus on my work the next day, but Dr. Carver's stories and my own unsettling experiences conspired to leave an indelible mark on my mind. At a staff meeting, I noticed a fleeting moment when he glanced directly at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His eyes, dark and penetrating, seemed to say, "I see you," and I couldn't help but shiver. I wondered, was he hinting at some shared experience, or was it simply the eccentric behavior of a man haunted by his own encounters? One rainy night, as I walked home from a late shift, I felt the oppressive chill of isolation. The nearest streetlights flickered intermittently, and the rhythmic sound of raindrops on the pavement filled the silence. In that moment, I recalled another of my boss's claims, that aliens had once stolen something from his house. He spoke of it with such quiet conviction that I couldn't decide whether to dismiss it as a delusion or to wonder if there was a grain of truth hidden in his words. The idea that extraterrestrial beings might intrude upon our lives, even for a fleeting moment, was both terrifying and strangely alluring. As the months passed, the mystery only deepened. I found myself returning to the office late at night, driven by a desperate need to understand the inexplicable. One evening, while alone in the building, I sat in a darkened conference room reviewing some documents when I heard a faint, rhythmic humming coming from the hallway. I checked my phone, 5% battery left, and tried to pinpoint the sound. It wasn't the usual hum of the heating system. It was something else, something that vibrated with a strange energy. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being pulled into a hidden narrative, one that connected my mundane existence with the bizarre accounts of my boss. I began to notice small, unsettling details, like the way the shadows in the hallway seemed to flicker just a bit longer than they should, or how a cold draft would sometimes rush through the building even when all the windows were shut. I recalled a brief conversation with a coworker who had mentioned seeing footprints outside his window, even though he lived in a secure apartment. Were these the same unexplained traces left behind by something or someone otherworldly? Every unanswered question only fueled my growing obsession with Dr. Carver's claims. I started to doubt my own perceptions. What if my boss wasn't delusional at all? What if his out-of-body experiences, his alien communications, and his mysterious abductions were more than just the ramblings of a troubled mind? I couldn't help but compare his stories with the uncanny experiences I'd witnessed on my own, like that bright, drifting light on the deserted highway, or the inexplicable tapping at my window. It all felt too connected, too perfectly orchestrated by some cosmic hand. In quiet moments, late at night, I'd replay his words over and over in my head. "I've been taken. I've seen things beyond your wildest nightmares." His voice, calm and measured, resonated in my ears long after the conversation had ended. And sometimes, I'd find myself wondering if perhaps, in the vast tapestry of the universe, our lives were intertwined with forces we could barely comprehend. A reminder that our understanding of reality was, at best, a fragile illusion. Even now, as I sit at my desk and write these words, the memories are vivid. The racing heartbeat, the icy sweat on my palms, the taste of copper in my mouth. I know I may never fully understand whether Dr. Carver's experiences were genuine encounters with extraterrestrial phenomena, vivid dream states mistaken for reality, or the products of a mind unraveling under the weight of its own secrets. What I do know is that those nights, filled with eerie lights and unexplained sounds, have left me with a deep, unsettling awareness that the universe is far more mysterious than we dare to believe. I've come to accept that some questions may never have answers. Perhaps, in the end, the truth about those alien abductions and out-of-body journeys lies somewhere between fact and delusion, a shadowy realm that defies the neat categories of rational thought. Until I have a definitive answer, I'll continue to watch the night sky with a cautious eye, ever aware that something unseen might be watching back. And so, every night when I lock my door and the streetlights cast long, shifting shadows across my room, I can't help but feel that eerie presence lingering just beyond the veil of darkness. I still hear that soft, unexplainable hum. I still catch glimpses of moving shadows, and sometimes, I swear I see a flicker of light where there should be none. In the quiet moments, I wonder if Dr. Carver's stories are a warning, a message from the cosmos that we are not alone, and that the boundary between reality and the unknown is far thinner than we ever imagined. Redditor 7. One seemingly ordinary evening after work changed everything I thought I knew about reality. It was a cool autumn night, the kind where a light breeze carries the scent of damp leaves and distant bonfires. I was checking my mail on the front step of my modest suburban home, a routine task I'd performed countless times without a second thought. As I sorted through the envelopes and flyers, I heard the unmistakable thump of helicopter rotors coming from the west. At first, I didn't think much of it. Living in the flight path for the local medical transport, I was used to the occasional drone overhead. I glanced upward, expecting to see the familiar flashing beacon of a CHP unit or perhaps a news chopper. But what I saw made my blood run cold. A brilliant white light was coming closer, slicing through the dark sky like a beacon of something not quite right. I assumed it was the spotlight of the CHP helicopter, its beam cutting through the night in its usual methodical sweep. The white light was moving fast, so fast it looked as if it were hauling ass, hurtling along the horizon. But then, as I strained to pinpoint the source, I realized something odd. The rotor noise, the deep, mechanical thumping, wasn't coming from the white light I was seeing. Instead, it seemed to originate from about 50 yards behind that dazzling orb. My heart began to pound in my chest as I squinted through the chill of the evening air. There, following that silent white light, was a helicopter. It had a single, pulsating red light that flashed intermittently, its rhythmic beeping stark against the otherwise silent night. This craft was clearly chasing the white light, maintaining an altitude of less than 100 feet, a dangerously low flight that made my skin crawl. I stepped back from the mail slot, my hands trembling as I tried to process what I was witnessing. The white light itself was unlike anything I'd seen before, an almost supernatural glow that defied the conventional behavior of any aircraft. It moved with an eerie, deliberate grace, its path seemingly independent of the laws of physics. Every time I moved my head, the light appeared to follow in perfect synchronicity, as if it were tethered to my very gaze. For a long, agonizing moment, I stood frozen on my porch, every nerve on high alert. The sound of the helicopter's rotors filled the space behind me, a relentless, mechanical roar that contrasted starkly with the silent majesty of the white light ahead. I could see the helicopter clearly. Its body was dark against the night, but the only feature that pierced the darkness was that solitary red flashing light. It was as if the craft itself was nothing more than a shadow, a mere extension of that otherworldly beacon. The memory of a book I once read, Stranger in a Strange Land, flashed through my mind, a passage where the protagonist could make objects vanish, as if they moved away at impossible speeds. That notion echoed in my head now as I watched the white light. In a blink, it accelerated, as though in a zip, and the pursuing helicopter, caught off guard, jerked violently. It stopped so abruptly that it practically stood on its tail, its rotors slicing the air in a stuttered, halting rhythm. For several minutes, the craft hovered, motionless against the inky sky, as if trying to regain its bearings. Then, almost as if it had never been chasing at all, it slowly turned to the north and flew off into the darkness, leaving only the enigmatic white light in its wake. I remember feeling a mix of terror and wonder. My mind raced with frantic rationalizations. Was I witnessing an elaborate military exercise, a malfunction of some sort, or, heaven forbid, a genuine encounter with something beyond our world? Every rational thought in my brain clashed with the raw, primal fear that gripped me. I could feel the chill of that night seeping into my bones, and my heartbeat thundered in my ears as I stood there, paralyzed on the porch. I eventually stepped back inside, my hands still shaking as I closed the door behind me. I tried to convince myself it was all a trick of the light, a bizarre interplay of shadows and reflections, but deep down I knew what I had seen was real. I sat at my kitchen table, the silence of my home now punctuated by the residual echo of the helicopter's rotor blades, and I replayed the events over and over in my mind. The entire experience left me questioning everything. I spent the rest of that night wide awake, unable to find solace in sleep. I kept picturing the white light, its unnatural brightness, its uncanny ability to follow my every movement, and the way the pursuing helicopter had halted so abruptly, as if it were caught in some inexplicable stasis. I wondered if the light was a probe, a silent observer that had momentarily revealed itself to me, or if it was a harbinger of something far more sinister. The fact that the helicopter had been chasing it, yet its rotors had produced no sound when the white light flew overhead, defied all logic. In the days that followed, I scoured the internet for any clues, reports of similar sightings, explanations from experts, even obscure military memos that might hint at classified experiments. I came across a few stories that echoed my own experience, accounts of mysterious lights and silent chases in the night sky, but nothing that fully explained the phenomenon I had witnessed. Each new piece of information only deepened the mystery, leaving me with more questions than answers. I tried discussing it with friends, but most dismissed it as an overactive imagination fueled by too many late-night movies and too little sleep. Yet, when I mentioned it to a couple of colleagues who were more inclined to believe in the unexplained, their eyes widened with recognition, as if they too had seen something similar in their own lives. Their hushed, conspiratorial tones only added to the growing sense of dread that had taken root in me. That night, on my porch, the image of that white light still burns in my mind, a relentless reminder that our world is full of secrets waiting just beyond the veil of everyday perception. I no longer feel entirely safe under the cover of darkness. Every time I see a bright light in the sky, my heart skips a beat, and I can't help but wonder if it might be that same otherworldly beacon, silently watching, waiting to reveal itself once more. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, I lie awake and listen to the distant hum of the city, the faint whir of the wind, and I almost swear I can hear the ghostly echoes of rotor blades in the distance. The memory of that encounter remains a constant companion, a mix of terror, awe, and an insatiable curiosity about what truly lurks in the uncharted expanses above us. Even now, as I type these words, I can feel the weight of that night pressing down on me, a silent specter that reminds me that the universe is far more mysterious and dangerous than we dare to believe. I've come to accept that some questions may never have answers, that the strange dance of lights and shadows in the sky might be part of a cosmic story we're only beginning to understand. And so, every time I catch a glimpse of a brilliant, inexplicable light or hear a faint mechanical whir in the distance, I am transported back to that fateful night. A night when the ordinary rules of our world were momentarily suspended, and for one terrifying, unforgettable moment, I was forced to confront the unknown. Redditor 8. I've never told anyone this before, but when I was young, I was absolutely terrified of aliens. I don't know why. I suppose it was a cocktail of too many late-night sci-fi shows, whispered urban legends, and an overactive imagination fueled by the loneliness of childhood. Every night, I dreaded the darkness outside my window, afraid I'd glimpse something that wasn't an ordinary airplane. My mom would scold me, frustrated at having to deal with my constant fear, yet one night everything changed. It was a humid summer night in our creaky old house, the kind where the air feels heavy and every sound is amplified. I was tucked into my small bed, the sheets cool against my skin, when I couldn't sleep. The darkness beyond my window, usually a comforting blanket of night, instead filled me with dread. I lay there, heart pounding, listening to the distant hum of the air conditioner and the occasional rustle of leaves, every noise setting my imagination aflame. Unable to bear the silence any longer, I slid out of bed and crept over to the window. I pressed my face against the cool glass, squinting into the blackness. At first, I saw nothing but the usual cluster of stars. Then, as if from nowhere, I noticed a large, glowing green object slowly moving across the sky. Its form was ovalish, enormous compared to any airplane I'd ever seen. What struck me the most were the 3 yellow lights arranged in a perfect triangle on its surface, blinking in a steady rhythm. I remember my breath catching in my throat as I stared at it in disbelief. The object wasn't moving erratically, it seemed to glide with an eerie, deliberate grace. Every time I shifted my head slightly to the left or right, the object seemed to follow, its lights tracking my movement with unnerving precision. I sat there, frozen, tears welling in my eyes as a mixture of terror and desperate curiosity overtook me. Mom, look!" I cried out in a trembling whisper, pulling back from the window in a futile attempt to wake her. I ran down the hall, my small feet slapping against the worn wooden floor. But when I burst into the living room, my mom only looked at me with a tired, dismissive frown. She said it was just my imagination playing tricks, that the light was nothing more than a reflection or perhaps a trick of the street lamp outside. No matter how much I tried to point it out, she couldn't see it. I remember how frustrated I felt, the tears streaming down my face as I pressed my forehead against her arm, pleading for her to understand. But she only sighed and patted my back, telling me to go back to bed and that everything was fine. That night, I lay awake for what felt like hours, my mind racing with questions. Was it real? Had I really seen something that defied explanation? The fear was so tangible that I could almost feel it crawling up my spine, a cold, persistent chill that wouldn't let go. The next morning, the pale light of dawn filtered through my window, but the memory of that glowing green object remained vivid in my mind. I sat at the breakfast table, mechanically spooning cereal into a bowl, while my mom chatted about mundane things like the weather and errands. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the universe had just whispered a terrible secret in my ear, a secret that only I had heard. As the years passed, I tried to convince myself that perhaps it had all been a dream, a figment of a frightened child's imagination. But even now, when I catch a glimpse of an odd light in the sky or a strange movement among the stars, I feel that old, familiar chill. I have nightmares about that night, the sound of my own sobs, the cold, unyielding window, and that monstrous, glowing green shape with its hypnotic yellow lights. Sometimes I lie in bed late at night, staring out my window in the pitch black, trying to recall every detail of that encounter. I can still see the object's oval form, the way its lights blinked in a slow, steady cadence, almost as if it were communicating a message in a language I couldn't understand. I tried to tell myself that it was nothing more than a meteor or an odd reflection, but deep down, I know that it was something else entirely, something that made me feel utterly alone and exposed in the vast, indifferent universe. The memory of that night has clung to me over the years, a quiet, persistent presence that I cannot shake. Even as an adult, whenever I travel by car at night or sit alone in a dark room, my mind drifts back to that moment. I recall the sound of my rapid heartbeat, the metallic taste of fear on my tongue, and the sensation of invisible eyes watching me from the cosmic void. It's as if that object has become a permanent mark on my soul, a reminder that some things are meant to remain unseen, lurking in the shadows of our deepest fears. I've tried to share the story with friends to explain how my childhood was forever changed by a single, inexplicable encounter. Most of them laugh it off or call it an overactive imagination, dismissing my memories as the remnants of a young mind haunted by late-night movies and bedtime stories. But there are moments, in the quiet of a starlit night, when I see a flicker in the corner of my eye and I'm transported back to that terrifying summer. I can't help but wonder if that alien presence was real, if it left an indelible mark on the universe and on me. Even now, I sometimes find myself glancing out my window, half expecting to see that same green glow or a flash of yellow light in the darkness. When I do, my heart races and my hands tremble, a visceral reminder of that long-ago fear. I try to push the memories aside to focus on the mundane rhythms of everyday life, meals, meetings, errands, but the shadow of that night lingers like a ghost. In quiet moments, I reflect on what it means to be haunted by something you can't explain. There's a peculiar kind of isolation in knowing that you've seen something no one else can, that your reality has been irreversibly altered by a glimpse into a world that defies logic. My mom never spoke of it again after that night, and over time, the conversation faded into silence, a tacit agreement to let the past remain buried. Yet, every time I close my eyes, I'm drawn back to that moment, to the overwhelming fear and the stark, unyielding brightness of that alien shape. I still don't know whether it was real or a trick of my mind, but the impact it had on me is undeniable. I live with a lingering unease, a persistent paranoia that the sky might one day reveal its hidden horrors once more. And sometimes, when the night is particularly still, I wonder if that mysterious object is still out there, watching me just as it once did, a silent sentinel in the vast, dark expanse of the universe. In the end, I have come to accept that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, that the terror of the unknown is part of what makes life both beautiful and terrifying. The memory of that night serves as a constant reminder that even in the quietest moments, the universe holds secrets that can shatter our illusions of safety and normalcy. And so, even now, as I sit in the relative comfort of my own home, I find myself haunted by the possibility that beyond the familiar glow of streetlights and the steady pulse of everyday life, there exists an unseen presence, a glowing alien specter that once made a little child sob in the dark, and that may one day return to remind me of just how fragile our reality truly is.